Anything.
And now we're ready.
We're live. Put on your clothes.
Live. Okay, so hello and welcome to another episode of Taking Liberties. We have our regular cast and crew here, Austen, coming from Sydney, and Lara's joining him there at the same place. Here in Canberra, we've got Kieran and myself, Vikas. So today we've got a show that basically pushes the limits of decency, and I guess we can talk about speed limits being the first rule of decency.
Yes.
And the Northern Territory is apparently looking at trialling no speed limits. Now, everyone should be aware that they basically had no speed limits and then decided to bring it down to 130 kilometers an hour, and then they experienced a few unintended consequences, and have since decided maybe we should try and go back to the old way.
I predict people need speed limits. I predict hundreds dead, many of them children, perhaps all of them children, if we repeal the speed limits, which is the only thing keeping us safe on the roads today.
I feel that on 200-kilometer stretches of straight road in the desert, that there is a real risk to pedestrians. And we are not giving this sufficient weight.
Personally, my support for this policy comes from my long-term and fervent interest in emu rights. I feel that emus have the right to safely cross the road, not only without having the motivations questioned, but without their safety risked by inconsiderate drivers.
Okay,
so we all agree that speed limits are a good thing.
My only problem with speed limits is that they are all too high. No speed limit should be above 10 kilometers an hour.
I swear I'm living in opposite day.
As a scientist, I believe all speed limits should be fractions of the speed of light for clarity. This miles per hour and kilometers per hour arbitrary bullshit is just confusing to me.
Well, I don't understand why the same stretch of road always has the same speed limit. I feel like if it's not changing arbitrarily, I just don't know what to do with my life.
That actually brings up a serious point. I think that if we are going to have speed limits...
That brings up a serious
point. That does
point.
bring up a serious point. If we're going to have speed limits, we have to do it in a way that actually does minimize danger. And that means speed limits that vary based on time, as well as space.
And weather.
And weather, yeah. I think that if we're going to have speed limits in a sensible way, we're saying that this is the maximum safe speed to drive, as in, and I doubt this whole hypothesis is true, that if there is a maximum safe speed to drive on a certain road, it is almost certainly dependent on the level of traffic on the road, which is dependent on time, and on the traffic conditions, which is dependent on weather. And I think it's ludicrous to say that, yes, we're going to set an arbitrary number, and it's going to be a multiple of 10, because it's always a multiple of 10 or 5, and that is the maximum safe speed that we have decided is going to give the minimum amount of risk on this road. And ultimately, what I really believe is that it depends on the driver, which is why I don't think we should have speed limits at all. Is that myself driving at a very high speed...
Did he cut out or did we?
I feel that he may have been driving.
That's unfortunate.
Austen... For our listeners out there, Austen has just been involved in a horror car accident in his apartment. This has been caused by very high speed limits in urban Sydney. I think to continue on sort of where Austen was talking about, what I would suggest is that speed limits are really about the conditions around there, the car you're driving, the level of skill for the driver. The idea that I quite like is that you would, perhaps the government may post a guidance, here's a recommended speed.
That means they have corners and hills.
Exactly. It's not revolutionary to do this. The government would post a guidance, a recommendation on the speed, and you would drive at a speed that you felt comfortable with. And if that was reckless or negligent in the level of speed and the conditions, then the police would fine you for reckless driving or endangering others, whatever you want to call it.
Well,
Allow drivers a lot more discretion in choosing the speed they drive, and you see in practice that this is what people do anyway. If you drive along on the highway, people are not going 110 in the rain. They're going much slower than that. You drive along, beautiful sunny day, clear traffic, people are not going 110, they're going 120 or so. Let people decide for themselves.
I more or less agree with both of you guys there. And, from my perspective, I do a significant amount of driving. I think my car hit 15,000 kilometers in the last 4 months. So, yeah, I'm very much verging on the long-haul driving territory here.
Do you sell drugs to truckies?
No, I just as Austin and Lara can back me up on this. I do love coming to Sydney for drinks. So yeah. So the main issue from my perspective is a lot of these limits don't make sense on very long straight stretches of road, like from Canberra to Sydney, where the roads themselves are designed for very high speed travel. So we have this thing where we spend a lot of money on infrastructure to get it to a state where it's really, really, really good for fast travel, and then we basically sit there with cops basically trying to slow people down, as far as I can tell, for no other purpose than revenue raising.
Well, and it's interesting, the effect that cops seem to have, I mean, this is from driving in the US, I don't actually know that much about Australian driving, is that cops do not slow down traffic on average, they slow it down on particular stretches where there are cops. I can't tell you the number of times I was driving I-90 in the U.S. I'd be going 75. I'd see people ahead of me, brake lights going on, and immediately I'd say, oh, probably a cop. So, you take it off cruise control, you go back down to 60, and sure enough, you see someone waiting on the side of the road. I mean, it's ludicrous. In fact, I would guess that actually makes things more unsafe when you're constantly worried, not about what is the safest way to be driving on this stretch of road, but will I be getting caught by the cops if I drive this speed? And that's one other factor to consider. And the more factors you're considering when you're driving, the less safe of a driver that makes you.
Well, interestingly enough, the ACT has sort of mitigated that particular issue with the introduction of average speed cameras. We have we have about 2 of them, I think, and another one on the drive into Canberra. And in that sense, yes, they reduce the speed over the average course of the road, but that just comes back to what I'm saying, in the sense that it looks like nothing but revenue raising, because we have these great roads that are kind of meant to be driven on more than 110 kilometers an hour, no pedestrians, no offshoots, it's just a straight highway, and yet we're basically slowing people down for no other reason than saying, oh look, there's a safety hazard somewhere that we can't state.
So I think just to pick up what you guys were saying, firstly, the speed change is an area of speed change is where accidents happen. If vehicles are suddenly slowing or particularly suddenly slowing and occasionally suddenly accelerating, that's where your risk level is, because the car in front of you has slowed down, you haven't slowed down, you run into them. That's your area of accidents. And so you see that, yes, when you stick a police car by the side of the road, the accidents will often go up. The other side is because of the sudden speed change, and you'll see similar things around speed zones, where you may have rapid changes between different zones. But one of the other sides is, and this is picking up what Vikas was saying, when you ask drivers to focus on something which is not driving, you increase the risk that something goes wrong with what they're meant to be doing, which is driving. So in the ACT, we have a lot of red light cameras, or speed cameras and red light cameras. They do both. And they're often in 60 zones, and you don't want to be driving through there at 64 or whatever, some marginal amount of the limit, and get flashed. Those cameras cause a statistically significant increase in the number of accidents at those intersections, because people are going through an intersection. Going through an intersection is the most dangerous area of any driving. Going through the intersection, and they're staring at their speedo, try not to go over 60, rather than keeping their eyes on the road and on the other cars. Accidents go up.
This is why I think so. Canberra is a managed city to begin with, and when we started here in Canberra, the idea was that the city would keep moving as far as road traffic went, and this is why it was referred to as the city of roundabouts. We started getting rid of these things, right? Yes, I'm bringing the freedom bounce in, and this has been by far one of the biggest mistakes Canberra's urban planning has made in the last 30 years or so. And we've been getting rid of roundabouts, and instead we've been sticking either bypasses or traffic lights. And the best example I can think of is Russell, Parksway Russell. I frequently drive down that area, and what used to take me, 10 seconds to cross, now, I might be sitting there for 3, maybe 4 minutes, which I know to a Sydney side it seems like, oh my god, you're complaining about having to sit for 3 to 4 minutes, well as a typical junction in Sydney might take you 20 minutes to get past. But
I don't like your tone, sir.
but Vikas is talking about 1/3 of his commute.
Yes, I'm talking about 1/3. I'm talking about, like, basically I'm saying that these intersections not only cause more accidents, but they're obviously counterintuitive to the way people actually drive. And they really, we're sort of getting away from speed limits here. They kind of, like, create traffic congestion where there shouldn't be any.
So what I would, and I think whether you're stepping around it intentionally or not, I think we should just jump in here and tell everyone who might not have heard about this about Peter Phelps. And so this is Upper House, New South Wales. Peter Phelps gave a speech to the Legislative Council extolling the virtue of roundabouts as
every ACT person knows.
The traffic management device.
Pause this podcast now and go listen to it.
Yes.
Seriously, just YouTube help roundabouts.
And then come back here.
I will put the link up, yes.
So, essentially, the argument which Phelps makes is that a roundabout allows you to freely negotiate with other traffic how you choose to traverse the roundabout. It's a series of cooperation. It's a cooperative exercise in getting around the roundabout, whereas traffic lights are a clear example of Bolshevist central planning.
They are literally Chairman Mao.
Well, yeah.
And I agree 100%.
They send you on.
Nice.
The only thing that I would add is that traffic lights are also an implicit subsidy to motor vehicles over other forms of transit.
Woo!
And here comes the talk about implicit subsidy. Okay, come on.
Yeah. So roundabouts very closely match average speed and peak speed through the intersection. Everyone is going at the same speed, and it favors transportation which has difficulty accelerating quickly, aka the bicycle. Traffic lights.
Suck it, bicycle.
Traffic lights have much higher peak speeds, but quite low average speeds. There's a big gap because you spend half your time sitting there at the intersection. They favor vehicles which can accelerate quickly, aka the car, and this is why Bolshevist traffic lights encourage people to drive cars and pollute the environment, so their government is bad.
Well, discussing transport in the city of government leads us with an absolutely fantastic segue to discussing what the government is doing to transport in the city of Sydney. The big news in town this week has been that the O'Farrell government has, in its infinite wisdom, decided to halve a charge for cabs. I forget which one it is. Someone fill the speaker in.
Half the surcharge on cab charges. Now, actually, this kind of upsets me in the sense that, one, I'm really upset that the government controls these surcharges, and two, I'm even more pissed that somehow the government has the pricing ability to, like, halve it. Just say it's halved now.
Look, I'm upset the government owns the roads, but progress is progress.
Yeah. In that sense, I like the fact that the surcharge has gone down, but I don't like the fact that it's instituted by government fiat. And the reality is, the reason why this happens is because the government and the taxi cartel are basically have basically locked up the market in a way that we just don't have a free private vehicle market. Well, like a free private vehicle taxi market.
Which is absolutely unbelievable to me. I have no idea what it is that the taxi industry has done to get government so in its pocket that it protects it so ridiculously. For those of you who are listening who might not know how it works, in order to drive a taxi, you need a license called a medallion. And most of these medallions are owned by these big companies, and they lease out the medallions to people who own and drive the taxis, so they kind of have a small business. And the price of these medallions they run up into hundreds of thousands of dollars because there is a limited number of taxis and there's a limited number of medallions, which makes it a nice little earner.
They're incredibly valuable, and if anyone has seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, he is searching for the medallion of Ra, which would actually allow him to operate a taxi in New York City. Yes, that's a subplot of the movie, the final cut, I think.
So true to life.
Yeah, but I know our friends in America, particularly Reason Magazine, have done loads of stories on taxi medallion systems, and they've pointed out, the typical scare story that comes up with why we need a medallion system is that, hey, an unscrupulous taxi provider will come across, take a tourist, and then somehow drag them some random place and do whatever they want with them, I suppose. But the idea is that unscrupulous people would flood the market. Now, I've used taxis before in Sydney, and I'm a Sydney local, and I can tell you, they take you the weirdest ways possible to wherever you want to get to go. I had one so I live up on the northern suburbs of Sydney. I had one try and take me down Military Road, and then swing all the way up past French's Forest and all this other crap to try and get me to Hornsby. Now, anyone who's in Sydney just goes, well, that's like a 20-kilometer loop that you really don't need to take.
It's bad.
Yeah.
I think the key point that I'd make is if let's say worst case scenario, the unscrupulous operator takes the taxi and drives you out into the middle of nowhere, call the fucking cop. So we live in a world of mobile phones. We live in a world where government insists on providing police. Surely the least the police could do is try and show up if someone's feels that they're in danger from the unlicensed taxi operator.
And
this would be a problem if I could carry a gun, and in a way that kind of hints at the solution here as well.
More guns. It's always the solution.
It's also
freedom.
You don't even have to go. You don't even have to go there, right? We've given the government all sorts of data retention capability, especially metadata retention capability, and you're telling me that they can't track us down to when an unscrupulous taxi cab guy has taken us to some random place? I don't believe he doesn't have access to that data.
Let's get back on the problem of what taxis cost, which, as I was trying to say, like firearms, can neatly be solved with deregulation. It's quite simple. Like, the risk is no different, but the price will be.
Well, if you look at the ways in other cities that people have gone to great lengths to go around these sort of restrictive taxi medallion laws, like you have these sort of private buses that will stop at certain things that will pick up and take people to certain stops, and they're not really buses, but they're not really cabs, and there's a huge demand for these in cities where traffic is a problem, like most Australian cities. And that it's a very easy way to make quality of life a lot higher for a lot of city dwellers. And no one loses except for cab drivers.
And so cab drivers...
Actually, cab companies.
Cab drivers win. So...
The licenses, more often than not, is not the driver.
Yeah,
and
so
definitely fuck those guys.
In New South Wales, there's about 6,000 taxi medallions going out to about 6,000 vehicles. and they're worth somewhere, I think it's in the region of $500,000 each. And those are owned by investors, companies, etc. of some kind. There are about 27,000 taxi drivers. And these guys are often low skill, and they're effectively, facing a cartel when they're negotiating their own pay. They can't go and say, oh, I'll go and work for this taxi company or that taxi company, because there's so few taxi companies, and the number of taxi companies is effectively regulated by the medallion system.
Right,
If you've got rid of the medallion system,
yeah. If you create a market where employees have to compete for employers, rather than having the ability to go and say, worst case scenario, I'll just buy my own car and start my own taxi company. That is not an option to aspiring entrepreneurs or taxi drivers.
Absolutely. So if you can go out and you can buy a brand new car in Australia for $20,000, it's not going to be a fantastic car. You could probably buy a large, a Falcador for $30,000-$40,000. That is a much lower barrier to entry than going out and buying a $500,000 medallion and a taxi.
Yeah, no.
And you get this sort of...
Sorry, what were you saying?
Vikas?
What?
Look, I was saying you get this sort of situation where you have bad regulation, creates this bad market, and of course, the proposed solutions almost inevitably consist of bad regulation. And curing regulation with regulation is curing like with like, and that is homeopathic legislation. And that is almost as bad as homeopathic medicine, which I think brings us on to our last topic for this evening.
Hey, check that.
Yes. It turns out that the Australian public actually spend a crap ton of money on homeopathy. It's actually kind of fantastic. Let me just pull up the actual figure here.
It's great. We can inflate the welfare figures.
It's true. You can just make up the money as you go along, but I think...
And while Vikas is looking up this figure, I would just like to explain to everyone who doesn't know exactly what homeopathic medicine entails. It's based on this guy who basically noticed that, when you give someone tablets to cure malaria, they get kind of sick. And their symptoms are kind of like malaria. So therefore, the best way to cure bad things is to give people versions of that bad thing. And that's where he came up with the philosophy of curing like with like. And the whole point is you take a toxin, something that causes a bad effect, and you give it to people in chemically zero dosage in the hopes of staving off another version of that bad effect. It's absolute nonsense. There's anyone who tells you that homeopathic medicine is science is probably not a scientist. So
okay, just to add insult to injury about how stupid that sounds and how much we're spending, we are spending $4 billion a year on homeopathic medicine. Yeah, with about
just like tomato.
With about 10 million of that coming from the government, so it's just ugly. Essentially,
that's a lot of roundabouts that could otherwise be built.
It's literally the most expensive water you can buy.
And water.
Continuing my complaint.
It's water which the government subsidizes. So you go and you sign up for your private healthcare cover, and you take the extras package, and you get a government rebate, depending on your income level of, I think it's 10 to 30% rebate, something like that. You get that rebate, and then you go and you use your health insurance to buy very expensive water, which does literally nothing to help you, except perhaps very mildly hydrate you. And ultimately, the government has picked up somewhere in the region of 10 to 30% of that bill.
To be fair, the insurance companies. To be fair, the insurance companies.
I mean all the taxpayers.
Yes. To be fair here, the Australian government isn't... Sorry, not the Australian government. The private insurance companies aren't completely retarded. I think the most they hand out for this is actually $650 if you're on, like, the best healthcare package you can get. So, I mean, yeah, so $650 at most. which is probably why the figure is quite low. Well, yeah, the figure for the actual government subsidy is quite low. The figure that we spend is quite high, but yeah. Wow, I'm still reeling over the fact that there's $4 billion a year spent on this crap.
And that's not even counting the other crap. There's all of the other alternative medicine. So yeah, homeo. This is one of the worst examples, but there's plenty of other bullshit like chiropractics, like vitamins, even
reflexology.
Yeah, reflexology. All of these other things, which these all get yeah. So paid for out of health insurance, and ultimately that comes out of me. So, as a taxpayer, I think that it's bullshit that I'm forced to pay for someone else's crazy, insane, non-medicine dressed up as medicine.
Look, I'll tell you something. I'm a little upset that I have to pay for anyone's medicine regardless of its legitimacy, and the fact that this doesn't work is really just adding insult to injury. That you're taking my money and you're not even using it to help people. It's absolutely obnoxious. And I think that the whole notion that the alternative medicine, if it worked, it would be called medicine. It's just bullshit. And I don't know whose idea it was to include this sort of shit there, but surely people, if they want to try out these sort of experimentations, can and should do so with their own money, not mine. Not that I'm actually paying anything.
Based on the figures that I pointed out though, and the figures that are here, it seems that largely it is people's own money. I mean, if you want to break it down, I mean, 4 billion versus 10 million actually coming from the government. I mean, you're talking about like, fractions of a cent on the dollar spent in the area. People are largely spending their own money, which I think is good. But a lot can be done to actually minimize this. I think that 10 million figure should come down. I think the government should probably look at winding back the rebates, or maybe placing the rebates conditional to only hospital care and so on and on and on. And that health insurance providers should look specifically to those alternative medicines being funded by user premiums, as opposed to obviously funded by the government rebate.
So where I'd say there's a legitimate role for government is in basically controversial opinion.
If companies beat down my door and force pills into my mouth, there's a legitimate role for government. Until such point, I fail to see what value they can add in the endeavour.
I think there is one area that they could add value, and that is to clamp down on fraud. If somebody is going to advertise alternative medicine as medicine, they are committing fraud, and I think that there is a legitimate role for government in trying to stamp out fraud.
Agreed.
I think it's actually a little bit worrying that, I mean, for that to work, there would need to be a government definition of medicine, which essentially gives them the power to rule anything that's not kind of on their list as automatically.
No, what I'll say is that actually already exists, and that's tort law. That's civil law, is that you cannot make false claims without putting yourself at risk of lawsuit. If you look at the claims that these sorts of, I don't even want to call it alternative medicine, if you look at the claims that these bullshit medicine practitioners come up with, none of them are testable. None of them will say, yes, this will cure your disease. They say this has many good properties and will balance your chi and your energy flow and will make you feel happier. And it's all sort of wishy-washy bullshit that, of course, does not put them liable for a lawsuit, and also could not be said to be fraud properly. It's taking advantage of people, but it is not fraud in the classical definition of such.
I disagree. I disagree completely. There are hundreds, thousands of products in the market which do make explicit medical claims of some kind. I get leaflets from chiropractors saying that they can cure everything under the sun. You can walk in and see leading brands of multivitamin in the supermarket saying that they're good for your well-being.
Yeah, good for your well-being. That's a claim that's completely untestable.
And there was a case a couple of weeks ago where they found that the things that they were saying were in these products were often not even in there.
That's fraud. That's an example of fraud. But saying it's good for your well-being is untestable. It's not. It cannot be said to be fraud, I think.
Depending on the exact wording.
Yes, absolutely depending on the exact wording.
How else are you going to access it?
Like the definition of fraud, in fact.
The reason, though, I would say that trying to enforce all of this via tort law is inefficient. That if
it's a bit tortuous.
It's very, very tortuous. That if I, for example, picked up the jar of omega-3 pills out of the cupboard that I might have spent $20 on, I'm not going to go and sue them over that because it's $20.
But you're still out of $20.
Omega-3s are a bad example. That's usually fish oil. That's actually a metabolizable substance. You can actually boost your fatty acid intake by taking something like fish oil, and that's all that's in the tablets. But that's an aside.
Fantastic. Anything else? Let's say that I had a standard as a multivitamin stack in there or something.
All right, I'll allow it.
You would be my chosen private court in Libertopia. FYI.
I appreciate it. Yeah. By the way, if we ever get to Ancapistan, I would be opening a private justice firm called This Criminal Government, and I would hope that you would all be my customers.
I, on the other hand, have often tooled around with the idea of opening up my own private court called the Police State. We'll see which one.
You also do banking. Be fractional reserve. Piss everyone off.
I will call my bank the fractional reserve. But, sorry, speaking of legitimate roles of the government, I think in this case, and I really am coming at this from more of a utilitarian perspective, things like rebates or grants for people that really can't afford healthcare aren't entirely a bad thing, in the sense that you can't really ever get to the state where everybody is going to pay for their own healthcare. There's always going to be a case of either someone being forced, and it's traditionally been done through religious authorities, through things like tithing. Yeah, there's always going to be someone forced to pay the healthcare, and I think grants or rebates go a little bit of the way into making it more user pays.
So I would just say that, honestly, it's not so much that government money ends up in the pockets of homeopathic medicine practitioners, because I'm a big fan of, if we're going to support things, we should do it by giving people a sum of money and allowing them to spend it how they see fit. It's really that this money is essentially earmarked for these specific ends, when you have it as part of a comprehensive quote-unquote health system, that you are picking winners, and in this case, you are picking losers, and that's even worse than trying to pick winners. And so I think that we really have to come to the conclusion that, yes, we think this is all nonsense, and while it might make some people feel good, that choice has to be left up to them, and that cost, importantly, has to be borne by them. And I think that's the whole idea. None of us would suggest banning homeopathic medicine except for Kieran, who's a communist. But the rest of us would say that, yes, let the fraudsters practice their black art of nonsense, but buyer beware, caveat emptor, freedom for everyone.
And I suppose that's a good place to leave it, because we've taken a lot of liberties tonight, and I guess we'll just have to call it a night. Yeah, sorry, man. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to be the statist in here and just call it a night.
But importantly, though, if anybody has any problems between now and the next recording, they should strongly consider taking it to this criminal government or the police state for an arbitrated resolution.
Yep. I will have a private army to enforce my rulings.
I have a couple of guns.
Alright, so catch everyone next week, and it's been
I think we're done, right? Like, this isn't going in the final recording, I hope.
Maybe.
Maybe.
We'll find out the week after this. Or the week after that.
Or in 3 months.
And that's our show for now. We've had a lot of fun, taken a lot of liberties. If you've enjoyed this show, you'll be happy to know that we are looking at expanding our time slot and having a Q&A session, which we will be calling Am I Being Detained? Stay tuned to hear more about this in the upcoming weeks on our Facebook page.